The late autumn rain painted downtown Atlanta's streets in shimmering reflections of red and blue emergency lights. Special Agent Maya Thompson emerged from her black FBI-issued SUV, her designer suit pristine despite the weather. At 32, she'd earned her reputation as one of the Bureau's rising stars, with an unmatched record in solving complex cases that crossed jurisdictions. Tonight's crime scene sprawled across 3 blocks of the financial district. Maya's heels clicked against the wet pavement as she ducked under the yellow tape, her FBI windbreaker and badge clearly visible in the swirling lights. The case had started as a local investigation into corporate theft, but new evidence suggested connections to a broader federal investigation involving multiple states. Detective James Barrett stood near the entrance of the Atlantic Trust Building, his 20 years on the force evident in his stance. Rain dripped from his graying temples as he surveyed the scene with the territorial pride of a veteran cop. He built his career on solving high-profile cases in Atlanta, earning commendations and the respect of his peers. But recent years had seen younger officers rising through the ranks and changes in procedure that challenged his traditional methods. Maya noticed Barrett's scrutiny as she approached the building's entrance. She'd encountered his type before, old-school cops who saw federal involvement as interference rather than assistance. Her FBI training had prepared her for such situations, maintain professionalism, establish clear communication, focus on the case. "Evening, Detective," Maya said, extending her credentials. "Special Agent Thompson, FBI. I understand you found evidence linking this case to interstate financial fraud." Barrett's expression hardened as he glanced at her credentials without taking them. "This is a local matter," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of authority. "We don't need federal involvement complicating our investigation." Around them, other officers and crime scene technicians continued their work, but Maya sensed their attention shifting to the brewing confrontation. She graduated top of her class at Quantico and earned her position through merit and determination. Tonight's case was too important for territorial disputes. "Detective Barrett," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I've reviewed the preliminary reports. The financial transactions cross state lines, and the suspect patterns mesh cases in 3 other jurisdictions. This falls under federal purview, but I'm here to collaborate, not take over." Barrett stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. The scent of coffee and rain filled the space between them. "Listen, Agent Thompson, I've got confidential informants and months of surveillance invested in this case. I won't have some federal agent waltzing in and—" "Your informants identified local players," Maya interrupted, maintaining eye contact. "But this operation is bigger than Atlanta. My team has traced similar patterns in Memphis, Charlotte, and Miami. We can work together on this, Detective. Your local knowledge combined with our federal resources." The rain intensified, but neither moved. Other officers watched the standoff, uncertain whether to intervene. Barrett's jaw clenched as he processed her words, his experience warring with his pride. 20 years of solving cases his way versus this new generation of law enforcement, with their databases and cross-jurisdictional cooperation. Maya could almost see the gears turning in his head. She prepared extensively for this meeting, reviewing Barrett's case history and commendations. His record showed brilliance tempered by stubbornness, innovation limited by tradition. The key was finding common ground. "Your work on the Rivers case last year was impressive," she said, referencing one of his recent successes. "That's exactly why I want your insight on this investigation. But I need access to the crime scene, Detective. The evidence isn't waiting for us to sort out our differences." The tension crackled between them like the static before a storm. Maya's hand rested casually near her badge, her posture relaxed but ready. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, but what happened next would set the tone for the entire investigation. Detective Barrett's fingers drummed against his leather holster, a habit from his rookie days. The rain had softened to a fine mist, but the tension in the air remained electric. Maya's words about the Rivers case had struck a nerve. That investigation had been his proudest achievement, until the Fed swooped in during the final arrests, claiming jurisdiction. "You've done your homework, Agent Thompson," Barrett said, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and suspicion. "But reading case files doesn't give you street knowledge. Every criminal organization in Atlanta has its own rhythm, its own rules." Maya stepped closer to the building's entrance, her trained eye catching details Barrett might have missed. "Like the Asian symbols carved into the doorframe?" she asked, pointing to nearly invisible markings. "The same markings we found in 3 other financial districts. Your local players are part of something bigger, Detective." Barrett's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't noticed the markings. Still, 20 years of pride doesn't dissolve in an instant. "Could be copycats," he argued, but his voice carried less conviction. "Local gangs love to imitate bigger operations. Around them, the crime scene buzzed with activity. CSI technicians photographed evidence, uniformed officers secured the perimeter, and detectives interviewed witnesses." Maya noticed how they all gave Barrett a wide berth, respect earned through years of successful cases, or fear of his notorious temper. "Let me show you something," Maya said, pulling out her tablet. Rain droplets scattered across the screen as she pulled up financial records. "These transactions, masked as routine business deals, all follow the same pattern. Atlanta's piece is crucial, but it's part of a larger puzzle." Barrett moved closer, professional curiosity temporarily overriding his resistance. The tablet displayed a complex web of transactions, each line connecting to multiple cities. His eyes narrowed as he recognized names from his own investigation. "Liu Chen," he muttered, pointing to one name. "Small-time money launderer. We've been watching him for months." "Small-time here, maybe," Maya replied, swiping to reveal more connections. "But his operation connects to major players in Memphis and Miami. Your surveillance could help us unravel the entire network." A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, followed by distant thunder. Barrett's expression shifted between interest and stubborn resistance. His hand moved from his holster to rub his chin. Another tell Maya had noticed in her research of his behavior patterns. "If, and I mean if, we work together," Barrett said slowly, "how do you propose we proceed? I'm not having my officers take orders from federal agents." Maya recognized the opening, small as it was. "Your team maintains control of local operations," she said. "My task force focuses on interstate connections. We share information, coordinate raids, but each maintains their jurisdiction." The promise of control seemed to ease some of Barrett's tension, but his next move surprised her. He stepped directly into her path, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "And what happens when our investigations conflict? When your federal priorities override local concerns?" Maya held her ground, her FBI training kicking in automatically. She noticed his right hand tensing, his weight shifting forward. Subtle signs of escalating aggression she learned to identify at Quantico. "Then we discuss it professionally, Detective," she said, her voice steady. "Like the trained law enforcement officers we are. This isn't about federal versus local. It's about stopping criminals who don't care about jurisdictional boundaries." The gathered officers had grown quiet, watching the confrontation with increasing unease. Barrett's reputation for being territorial was well known, but so was the FBI's authority in cross-state cases. "Your task force," Barrett said, his voice dropping to a near growl, "has no idea what they're walking into. Atlanta's criminal underground doesn't play by FBI rulebooks." Maya met his gaze steadily. "Maybe not," she replied. "But they've never dealt with an FBI agent who grew up in the projects of South Chicago either. Sometimes understanding the streets means knowing when to work together, Detective." The tension reached a breaking point. Barrett's next move would either bridge the gap between old and new law enforcement or shatter any hope of cooperation. The weight of dozens of watching eyes pressed against Maya's shoulders as Barrett processed her words about her South Chicago roots. His face flickered through emotions, surprise, disbelief, and something darker. The crime scene's flashing lights cast alternating shadows across his features, making them seem to shift between professional detective and wounded pride. "South Chicago doesn't mean you understand Atlanta," Barrett said, his voice low enough that only Maya could hear. 20 years I've kept these streets clean, my way. Every time the feds step in, good cases go sideways. Maya spotted a junior detective approaching with an evidence bag, his steps hesitant as he sensed the tension. Inside the clear plastic, she glimpsed something that made her pulse quicken. Documents with the same watermark she'd been tracking across state lines. "Excuse me, Detective Barrett," she said, stepping around him professionally. "That evidence is relevant to my investigation." Barrett's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "You don't give orders at my crime scene." Time seemed to slow. Maya's FBI training kicked in automatically, muscle memory from countless hours at Quantico taking over. In one fluid motion, she shifted her weight, using Barrett's own momentum against him. Her free hand came up to break his grip using a standard FBI defensive technique. Minimum force, maximum efficiency. Barrett stumbled backward, more from surprise than force. His face flushed red as several officers stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene. The junior detective with the evidence bag froze in place. "Detective Barrett," Maya said calmly, her voice carrying across the now silent crime scene, "I'm going to overlook that lapse in judgment because I respect your service record. But let me be clear. I'm a federal agent conducting a legitimate investigation. Physical interference with that investigation is a felony." Barrett straightened his jacket, the realization of what he'd done washing over his face. 20 years of reputation hung in the balance. Around them, officers pretended to return to their work while watching the drama unfold. "Agent Thompson," a new voice cut through the tension. Captain Sarah Rivera, Barrett's superior, strode toward them. "I just got off the phone with your assistant director. I understand you have evidence linking this scene to cases in other states." Maya nodded, maintaining her professional composure. "Yes, Captain. The documents your detective just recovered appear to match others we found in Memphis and Miami. Same watermark, same paper stock." Rivera turned to Barrett, her expression stern but understanding. "Detective, take a walk. Cool off. Agent Thompson has full access to the scene and all evidence by my authority." Barrett's jaw clenched, but years of discipline won out. He stepped back, though his eyes never left Maya. She recognized the look, not hatred, but the painful recognition of change. The old ways of doing things were ending, and not everyone could adapt. "Captain," Maya said, "despite this incident, Detective Barrett's expertise could be invaluable to this investigation. His knowledge of local players and patterns could help us unravel the larger organization." Rivera raised an eyebrow, surprised by Maya's diplomatic approach. Barrett too seemed taken aback by her willingness to still work with him after his actions. "If," Maya continued, meeting Barrett's gaze directly, "he's willing to approach this as a true collaboration. My task force has resources and reach, but we need your street-level insights." The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with humidity and possibility. Barrett looked between Maya and Rivera, then at the evidence bag still clutched by the junior detective. 20 years of solving cases his way warred against the undeniable logic of cooperation. "Your call, Detective," Rivera said quietly. "But consider carefully what serves justice better, pride or partnership." Maya watched Barrett's internal struggle play across his face. In his expression, she saw echoes of older officers she'd known in Chicago, good cops who'd had to learn that strength sometimes meant knowing when to adapt. Barrett's next words would determine not just the course of the investigation, but perhaps the future of interagency cooperation in Atlanta. The Atlanta Police Department's briefing room buzzed with hushed conversations as Maya presented her findings. The evidence from the crime scene had opened a Pandora's box of connections, each document revealing new threads in an increasingly complex web. Barrett sat in the back corner, his usual commanding presence diminished by the morning's events. The watermarked papers matched documents found in 4 other jurisdictions, Maya explained, clicking through slides on the projector. Each location showed the same pattern: financial institutions, corporate theft, and local criminals working as unknowing pawns in a larger scheme. Captain Rivera stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching both the presentation and her officers' reactions. The incident between Barrett and Maya had already sparked department-wide whispers, but Rivera's quick handling had prevented it from escalating further. Maya noticed Barrett studying the financial diagrams with intense focus. Despite his earlier behavior, his investigative instincts were clearly engaged. She'd read his case files. He had a talent for spotting patterns others missed. This suspect, Barrett's voice cut through the quiet room, surprising everyone. Liu Chen. His patterns changed 3 months ago. Started making regular trips to Miami instead of Memphis. Maya pulled up the travel records. You're right. The timing coincides with a new series of transactions we've been tracking. How did you notice that? Been watching him for months, Barrett admitted, a hint of his old confidence returning. Something felt off about his routine changes, but we couldn't connect it to anything local. The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. Other detectives began offering observations, connecting local knowledge to Maya's federal intelligence. The wall between agencies started to crack. After the briefing, Maya found herself in Rivera's office. Barrett conspicuously absent. The captain's desk held a framed photo of her rookie days, standing proudly beside a much younger Barrett. He was my training officer, Rivera said, following Maya's gaze. Best detective I've ever known. Until things started changing. Maya finished. I've seen it before. Good officers struggling with new methods, new perspectives. Rivera nodded. The department's changing. Has to change. Barrett's old-school tactics worked in their time. But she paused, choosing her words carefully. Your handling of the situation this morning was exemplary, Agent Thompson. I meant what I said about needing his expertise, Maya replied. 20 years of street knowledge doesn't disappear because of one bad moment. A knock interrupted them. Barrett stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Got a minute, Agent Thompson? Maya followed him to an empty interview room. The morning sun cast long shadows through the blinds, striping his face in light and darkness. I watched the security footage, he said quietly. Of the incident, saw myself. He trailed off, rubbing his chin. 20 years on the force. I've never. Detective, Maya interjected. What matters now is how we move forward. Your insights about Liu Chen prove you're still one of the sharpest investigators in Atlanta. This case needs that insight. Barrett's shoulders straightened slightly. Found something else in my old files. 3 years ago, we investigated a similar paper trail. Case went cold, but he pulled out a worn notebook. The patterns match your Miami connections. Maya recognized the gesture for what it was, not just information sharing, but an olive branch. Would you walk me through it? For the next hour, they pored over Barrett's old cases, finding connections that bridged their investigations. His street-level intelligence complemented her federal resources, creating a clearer picture of the criminal organization. As they worked, Maya noticed subtle changes in Barrett's demeanor. The defensive hostility melted away, replaced by the focused intensity of a skilled detective pursuing justice. His reputation hadn't been built on stubbornness alone. He was genuinely good at his job. The morning's confrontation had shattered something, but perhaps what would grow in its place would be stronger. The real test would come when they took their findings to the Joint Task Force meeting that afternoon. The Joint Task Force headquarters hummed with activity as Maya and Barrett presented their combined findings. Large screens displayed surveillance photos, financial records, and connection maps. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Liu Chen isn't just a money launderer, Barrett explained, pointing to a complex diagram. He's their talent scout. Identifies vulnerable financial institutions, maps their security patterns, then passes the intelligence up the chain. Maya watched him work, noting how naturally he'd adapted to the federal investigation's pace. His earlier resistance had transformed into focused expertise. She stepped forward, expanding on his analysis. The pattern repeats across 5 cities. She continued, bringing up new data. Local criminals recruited for their specific knowledge, but kept ignorant of the larger operation. It's why the connection stayed hidden so long. An FBI analyst raised his hand. Agent Thompson, these recruitment patterns, they matched Detective Barrett's notes from the Rivers case last year. Barrett tensed slightly at the mention of his past case, but his response remained professional. Similar methodology, different players. I missed it then because I was too focused on local angles. He paused, glancing at Maya. Sometimes you need fresh eyes to see the bigger picture. During a brief break, Maya found Barrett in the building's small break room, staring into a cup of coffee. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, highlighting how tired he looked. "The Rivers case still bothers you," she said, making herself a tea. Barrett's fingers tightened around his cup. "Lost my partner on that one. Not to violence, to disillusionment. She saw what I couldn't, that the world was changing faster than I was willing to change with it." "What happened to her?" "Transferred to cyber crimes. She's a captain now, running their whole digital forensics unit." A hint of pride crept into his voice. "She adapted. I just dug my heels in deeper." Maya leaned against the counter, considering her next words carefully. "You know, my first month at Quantico, I failed defensive tactics 3 times. Instructor said I was too focused on proving myself, not focused enough on learning." Barrett looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "You? But this morning when I—" He trailed off, embarrassment creasing his features. "I learned to stop fighting against change and start working with it." Maya sipped her tea. "Like you're doing now." Their conversation was interrupted by a junior agent bursting into the break room. "Agent Thompson, Detective Barrett, we found something in the financial records. You need to see this." Back in the main room, new evidence flashed across the screens. Hidden beneath layers of legitimate transactions, a pattern emerged that made Barrett straighten suddenly. "Those account numbers," he said, pulling out his worn notebook. "They match a series of cold cases from 5 years ago. High-level corporate theft, but we could never prove the connection." Maya studied the data. The same organization, evolving their methods. They've been building this network for years, using local insights to perfect their approach. Barrett's experience proved invaluable as they dug deeper. His knowledge of Atlanta's criminal history helped identify crucial patterns that even the FBI's sophisticated algorithms had missed. Working together, they began to unravel years of carefully hidden criminal enterprise. As the afternoon wore on, Maya noticed subtle changes in how the other officers interacted with Barrett. His earlier confrontation had sparked whispers, but his dedication to the case was earning back respect in a different way. He wasn't just the old-school detective resistant to change anymore. He was proving that experience and adaptation could work together. "Detective," Maya said as they examined another set of records, "your history with these cases gives us context we couldn't get any other way. Would you consider taking point on the local coordination when we move to make arrests?" The offer hung in the air, a test of how far they'd come since that tense confrontation in the rain. Barrett's response would reveal whether the morning's shattered pride had truly transformed into something stronger. Sunset painted Atlanta's skyline in shades of amber as Maya and Barrett worked late in the task force command center. Screens displayed surveillance feeds from multiple locations, tracking their suspects' movements across the city. "Liu Chen's making his move," Barrett said, watching a live feed. "Third financial district visit this week. He's accelerating his pattern." Maya nodded, noting how smoothly they now worked together. The morning's confrontation felt like ages ago. "He's nervous. Our increased presence in his usual spots has him looking for new targets." A young FBI tech analyst approached with a tablet. "Agent Thompson, Detective Barrett, we've decoded more of the encrypted messages from Chen's network. They're planning something big tomorrow night." Barrett studied the decoded messages, his experienced eyes catching details others might miss. These locations, they're not just hitting one target. He moved to a city map, marking points rapidly. They're planning simultaneous strikes across 5 financial institutions. A coordinated attack, Maya agreed, seeing the pattern emerge. Force us to split our resources, maximize their chances of success. The command center sparked with renewed energy as they assembled the pieces. Barrett's intimate knowledge of Atlanta's financial district proved invaluable as they mapped potential escape routes and security vulnerabilities. "Your old CI network still active?" Maya asked quietly, during a brief lull. Barrett's expression tightened momentarily. "Most of them. Some won't work with feds, but—" He paused, considering. "Let me make a few calls. Might be able to get inside eyes on their prep work." As Barrett stepped away to work his contacts, Captain Rivera arrived for an update. She watched him talking quietly on his phone, then turned to Maya. "Quite a transformation," she observed. "This morning he could barely stand having federal agents at his crime scene. Now he's activating his confidential informants for your operation." "He's a good detective," Maya replied. Once he saw how the pieces fit together, the bigger picture became more important than old rivalries. Barrett returned, his expression focused. "Got confirmation. They're staging from 3 separate locations, planning to hit all targets within a 15-minute window. My CI says they're bringing in muscle from Miami." Maya's phone buzzed. Photos from their Miami surveillance team. "Confirmed. 3 known enforcers boarded a private flight an hour ago. They're bringing serious firepower." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Local SWAT teams coordinated with FBI tactical units, planning simultaneous raids on the staging locations. Barrett's street knowledge helped them anticipate potential civilian exposure, allowing them to quietly evacuate key areas without tipping off their targets. As midnight approached, Maya found Barrett in the break room, studying old case files. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under his eyes. "Second thoughts?" she asked, making fresh coffee. "Looking at the Rivera case from 6 years ago," he replied. "Similar setup, but we moved too soon. Lost the big players, only caught the local muscle." He looked up at her. "Can't make the same mistake twice." "That's why we're doing this together," Maya said, sliding him a fresh cup. "Your experience, our resources. Better odds than either of us would have alone." Barrett accepted the coffee, a slight smile breaking through his serious expression. "You know, this morning when He paused, searching for words. "I was wrong. Not just about the jurisdiction thing. About everything." "Water under the bridge," Maya replied. "What matters is what we do next." Their planning was interrupted by urgent movement in the command center. New surveillance footage showed their targets on the move, hours ahead of schedule. "They're spooked," Barrett said, analyzing the footage. "Something tipped them off. They're accelerating the timeline." Maya was already moving, alerting tactical teams. "How fast can your people be ready?" Barrett grabbed his jacket, determination replacing fatigue. For this, they've been ready their whole careers. As they headed out into the night, both knew the next few hours would test their new partnership to its limits. The streets of Atlanta were about to witness whether their morning's confrontation had truly forged a stronger alliance. Rain returned to Atlanta's streets as tactical teams moved into position. Maya and Barrett coordinated from a mobile command center, surrounded by screens showing thermal imaging of their targets' movements across the city. "Team Alpha in position," crackled the radio. Confirmed visual on Liu Chen and 2 associates entering the primary target. Barrett studied the building schematics, his fingers tracing possible escape routes. "They'll have a backup plan. Chen always works with redundancies." He pointed to a service entrance. "There's an old tunnel system here, connects to 3 other buildings, not on current maps." Maya immediately relayed the information to the tactical teams. "This is why we needed you on this," she said quietly. "Some things aren't in any federal database." The operation unfolded like a chess game. Chen's organization had sophisticated counter-surveillance measures, but Barrett's intimate knowledge of Atlanta's underground network helped them stay one step ahead. Movement at the secondary location. A SWAT commander reported. Suspects are splitting up. They're testing our coverage, Barrett realized, watching the thermal signatures diverge. Trying to figure out how many units we have. His eyes narrowed. Wait. That pattern. I've seen it before. He pulled up footage from an old case, comparing movement signatures. They're not splitting up. It's a distraction. Their real target is here. He pointed to a seemingly quiet location on the map. Maya trusted his instincts. All units, he advised. Primary target has shifted. Converge on Chapman Financial. The next 30 minutes were controlled chaos. Chen's organization had indeed planned an elaborate deception, but Barrett's experience had caught it. As federal and local units surrounded Chapman Financial, they found themselves facing the operations leadership, FBI. On the ground, Maya's voice carried through the building's marble lobby as teams breached from multiple entry points. Barrett's voice joined hers from another entrance. Atlanta PD. Building is surrounded. The suspects, realizing they were trapped, made one last desperate attempt. Gunfire erupted, shattering the night silence. Maya and Barrett moved in perfect sync. Their morning's confrontation transformed into seamless cooperation. Two suspects heading for the tunnel access. Barrett called out, already moving to intercept. Maya flanked through a service corridor, her FBI tactical training complementing Barrett's street experience. They converged on the suspects just as they reached the hidden entrance. Like you said, Maya commented as they secured the prisoners. Chen always has a backup plan. Had a backup plan, Barrett corrected, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Not anymore. As the scene secured, Maya watched Barrett coordinate with both FBI agents and local officers, all traces of his earlier resistance gone. He'd become the bridge between federal and local law enforcement that this case needed. In the aftermath, they'd regrouped in the mobile command center. Multiple screens showed arrested suspects, seized evidence, and teams securing additional locations across the city. Final count. Captain Rivera asked, joining them. 17 arrests, Maya reported, including Chen and 3 senior operatives. Evidence linking them to operations in 5 cities. The whole network is exposed. Barrett added, local charges will stick too. Got them on multiple counts of corporate theft, conspiracy, and assault on law enforcement. Rivera smiled slightly. Quite a difference from this morning's standoff in the rain. Maya and Barrett exchanged glances, acknowledging how far they'd come. The tension of their first encounter had transformed into something neither expected, genuine respect. The Bureau will want a full briefing, Maya said. Your insights on how they used Atlanta's infrastructure could help us identify similar operations in other cities. Barrett nodded, then hesitated. About this morning, what I did showed me exactly who you were, Maya finished. Someone willing to learn and adapt when it matters most. That's why this operation succeeded. As dawn broke over Atlanta, they began processing the mountain of evidence. Their confrontation had sparked a change larger than either imagined. A new model of cooperation between federal and local law enforcement. The final phase of their operation would test whether this transformation could last beyond one successful night. 1 month after the Chapman Financial raid, Maya stood at the podium in Atlanta PD's main conference room. Camera flashes punctuated her speech as she addressed the joint press conference. The successful dismantling of this multi-state criminal enterprise represents more than just good police work, she said, her voice steady and clear. It shows what's possible when federal and local law enforcement agencies truly collaborate. Barrett sat in the front row, his posture relaxed, a stark contrast to their first encounter. His temporary badge identifying him as FBI Task Force Liaison caught the light as he shifted in his chair. After the press conference, they retreated to Rivera's office for a final debrief. The wall now displayed a framed photo of the task force team, Maya and Barrett standing side by side after the raid. The Bureau's officially requesting to make the joint task force permanent, Maya announced, placing a folder on Rivera's desk. They want Detective Barrett to head the local division. Barrett looked up sharply. A permanent position. Your expertise in this case proved invaluable. Maya explained. The way you adapted your street-level intelligence to complement our federal resources, it's exactly what we need for future operations. Rivera smiled, picking up the folder. From refusing to work with federal agents to heading a joint task force. Quite a journey, James. Barrett's weathered face showed a mix of emotions as he absorbed the news. A month ago, I would have said federal cooperation would ruin local police work. He glanced at Maya. Funny how one morning in the rain can change everything. It wasn't just the rain, Maya said. It was watching a good detective choose growth over pride. The Bureau needs more of that perspective. Their conversation was interrupted by a young officer rushing in. Detective, Agent Thompson. Liu Chen's talking. Says he'll provide information on operations in 3 more cities, but he'll only speak to both of you. In the interrogation room, Chen sat calmly, studying Maya and Barrett as they entered. The famous duo, he said softly. Your partnership cost me everything. Your own choices cost you everything, Barrett corrected. We just worked together to expose them. As Chen revealed his organization's deeper connections, Maya watched Barrett work. His interrogation style had evolved, seamlessly blending his street-smart approach with federal protocols. The detective who'd confronted her in the rain had transformed into something more, a bridge between 2 worlds of law enforcement. Later that evening, they stood in the parking garage where they'd first clashed. The rain had returned, gentler now, more like a blessing than a confrontation. The task force position, Barrett said, breaking the comfortable silence. It means learning a whole new way of doing things. Maya leaned against her FBI vehicle. You've already started. That first morning when you chose to share your old case files instead of holding on to jurisdiction, that was the first step. Still can't believe I tried to block an FBI agent from a crime scene. He chuckled, shaking his head. 20 years of doing things one way, and in 1 month. Change isn't about erasing experience, Maya said. It's about building on it. Your 20 years made this operation successful. We just added new tools to your arsenal. Barrett extended his hand, no hesitation this time. Partner. Maya shook it firmly. Partner. As they headed to their respective vehicles, Barrett called out. Hey, Thompson. Thank you. Not just for the task force offer. For showing me there's always room to grow. Maya smiled. See you Monday, Detective. We've got 3 more cities to clean up. The garage lights gleamed off their badges. FBI and Atlanta PD, different symbols of the same commitment to justice. Their morning confrontation had shattered old barriers, forging something stronger in their place. As Maya drove home through the gentle rain, she reflected on how one moment of tension had transformed into a partnership that would reshape law enforcement in Atlanta. Sometimes, she realized, the strongest bridges are built where walls once stood.